we are starting with, we're on page 169 if you have the book. And if somebody.
The book is, the text is also the commentary on our website, on the Sunday school link. So you don't have to buy the book. You can read it on the website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If you want, you don't have to.
I'll send you that link after
Okay.
church.
Thank you.
But anyway, we're in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, and Kitten ended just where I would have to start with adultery. Thank you.
Sarah, can I say one thing real quick?
Sure.
Was anybody interested in finding out where in the Bible that it said Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were members of the Sanhedrin Council and you couldn't find it?
Yeah, that was interesting to me. I'd be interested in knowing that.
Okay, you want to write this down real quick?
Yes.
Nicodemus, it's John 3:1, where it says he's a member of the council.
Okay.
And for Joseph of Arimathea, it's in Mark 15:43.
Okay.
And Luke 23:50. They both were members of the council. And I've always wondered if they voted no to condemn Jesus, but maybe I'll find out one day.
Well, if you find out and we're still here, send us a message.
Yeah.
It'll
Or
come
send a
on
message if you've moved on to other realms.
Yeah.
Find a way to let us know.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. Would somebody read Matthew 5:27 through 28?
I will.
Thank you.
You have heard that it has been said, you must not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman in such a way as to waken within himself forbidden desires for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
Okay, goody. So this is the second example of Jesus's new standard. Last week, Kitten ended with, Kitten, what'd you end up with? Making peace.
We ended by talking about if you're wrong and you try to make amends and you apologize, but the person doesn't forgive you, are you forgiven? And I ended talking about Judas and how I thought Judas was forgiven because he threw the money back, but the priest didn't forgive him. But Judas asked for forgiveness. So we ended talking about if you've wronged somebody, you must get straight with that person before you go to church to get straight with God. You must get straight with people.
So this is the second one. Clearing up again in great detail about not committing adultery, and that it's not just having sex with a married woman, but the actual thought. Now, adultery was considered such a horrible crime at the time that the punishment was death. And if I remember correctly, it was death by stoning.
That's the way I remember it.
Yeah.
For both participants?
For both participants.
But that's why Jesus said, he who is without guilt, let him cast the first stone.
Yeah.
But it seems like in the New Testament, there are, even in the Old Testament too, now that I'm thinking this through, there are multiple stories about women of poor reputation. But there aren't many stories about men and their poor reputations in relation to their sexual habits, their monetary
Well,
habits.
David.
He lusted after Bathsheba until he could get Uriah on the front lines to.
Okay, so we got one.
I don't remember Cassie's.
All right, so let's start naming the women.
What about Samson and Delilah? Would that be considered?
Well, he certainly got stupid when he got close to her.
Well, I think that happens often.
Yeah, women somehow get most of the bad press here.
Yeah, Delilah definitely took advantage of Samson.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not saying women are, they put them, sometimes some women put themselves in that bad position. But look at what happened to the
Rahab.
reputation of Mary Magdalene over time, because there's, nothing that says Mary Magdalene was a prostitute.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but until recent years, I thought she had been. So, I didn't.
Wasn't Rahab the woman that God used to let Joshua get in Jericho?
Mhm. Mhm.
So she was a prostitute.
Right. The woman at the well, the woman that had been married was she the one that had been married 5 times or something like that? So
Yeah.
anyhow, we digress, Sarah.
Oh, that's the beauty of this class. The man who is condemned is the man who looks in such a way that passion is awakened and desire is deliberately stimulated. So he's not condemning normal, we were built to be sexual beings. That's fine, that's good. That follows the commandment to, be fruitful and multiply. This is talking about in today's world, somebody that spends lots of time on the internet looking at porn. That's the type of thing he's talking about, that you're doing something that you're not supposed to do. And for some reason, I kept thinking of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here. That Jekyll knew he shouldn't take the potion that turned him into an evil being, but he couldn't stop himself.
Mhm.
He lusted after that power that being Mr. Hyde gave him. I don't know why this reminded me of that.
And this makes me think of, Jimmy Carter's interview with Playboy back in the 70s,
Yeah.
and he took so much heat for that. But, looking back on that, he was being very genuine,
Yeah, he was.
very honest, extremely honest. And so anyhow.
So Barclay says, in a tempting world, there are many things which are deliberately designed to excite desire. Books, pictures, plays, even advertisements. I mean, you can go back, especially some advertisements that today are not considered politically correct. Really could raise some eyebrows about.
Well, and Barclay wrote this in the 50s.
Well, that's true too. Okay, I
So
forgot about that.
Yeah. So can you imagine
What he would say today?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because back then, television shows, if you were married, you were sleeping in twin beds and had to have one foot on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably rolling over in his grave to see what we do on the screen now.
Right.
So anything that you do that takes you beyond just a healthy sexual appetite for your life partner is just wrong. But apparently extremely tempting, and so we'll go on to the next one. Would somebody read Matthew 5:29-30?
I'll read it.
Okay.
If your right eye proves a stumbling block to you, tear it out and throw it away from you. For it is better that one part of your body should be destroyed than that your whole body should go away to Gehenna. If your right hand proves a stumbling block to you, cut it off and throw it away from you. For it is better for you that one part of your body should be destroyed than that your whole body should go away to Gehenna.
Okay. This is a scary thing to read because, none of us is perfect. Now, getting back into entomology here, the word that's used as stumbling block, according to Barclay, is very interesting. It is the word scandalon, which is a form of the word scandalethron, which means bait stick in a trap. It was the stick or the arm on which the bait was fixed and which operated the trap to catch the animal lured to its own destruction. So this word came to mean anything which causes a person's destruction. And he says that there are 2 pictures that this brings to mind. First is a hidden stone in a path that you stumble over, or maybe a cord that you trip over. And then there are also hunters in the past have used this where they dig a pit and then cover it very loosely, and an animal that walked over it just fell into the pit. So you're not paying attention to things, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. And of course, Barclay says, Jesus didn't mean for you to literally cut off your hand if your hand caused you to sin. But if there's a habit which regularly seduces you to do something evil, you're supposed to cut out that habit. And I've got a friend, and I don't know her well enough to know if it's a problem, but I'm kind of concerned that she likes to gamble too much, that type of thing. Just quit going to the gambling part, So just root it out of your mouth, or root it out of your life. So how do we take these thoughts that lead us astray? How do we get rid of them?
I think the best thing to do is, well, if you can get therapy, but a lot of people can't afford that. Therapy is very expensive, but pray about it. I mean, if you sincerely want to change, I think God will help you find a path to do that.
And also to replace it with good behavior. Put something in its place.
Yeah, Barclay tells the story about the wrong way to try to do this. And he tells the story of St. Anthony, who was a hermit and went out into the wilderness to live by himself and spent 35 years trying to get these thoughts out of his mind. Because there's somehow we are very contrary. If you tell yourself you're not going to think about something, it's what's uppermost in your mind. It's like me trying to lose weight. I am not going to eat that cookie, candy, cake, whatever's in the pantry. And every time I walk through the kitchen, I think about it. I hear it calling to me. But if I'm busy doing something somewhere else in the house, I don't have those thoughts. I don't hear that siren call of the chocolate. So replacing it, keeping yourself busy. And Barclay talks about doing Christian actions, doing something for other people, which of course, with the quarantine is challenging because we're trying to stay away from other people, but also, and this is the harder part, trying to replace those thoughts rather than just saying, I'm not going to think about it, actively think good thoughts.
At the top of page 173, he says, Christian service.
Yes.
He says, Christian action, Christian labor, and Christian service, so that you have no time for these thoughts.
Yeah. So anybody got any real world stories about how this works in real life?
The sin, Sarah, is really having the chocolate in the house.
Grocery shopper, it's my fault.
Yeah, up until I started my baking binge, I could blame him because he's right. He does 95% of the grocery shopping, and he was bringing in ice cream treats and candy bars and cookies. But now that I'm on the baking binge, it's my fault because I'm making cakes and cookies and wonderful homemade bread. And
Make the cakes and cookies to give them away to other people.
yes, well, a fair amount of it has been given away, but my most recent experiment didn't go well. And it's good enough for me to eat, but I would be embarrassed to give it to anybody else.
We always have to taste it first to make sure it's good enough to give away.
Right.
Yeah.
This
I
was
did some turtle candies last night. They were marvelous and very.
Oh,
And who
my
are you
gosh, the
giving it to?
trifecta, chocolate, caramel,
And
and
pecan.
pecans. Oh,
Oh, yummy.
Just don't cut your hand off, Chris.
I think I'm lusting after turtles now.
Oh, well, Sarah, sort of going back to your question, a real life situation, using, and this has become a popular kind of thing to do nowadays, but it's being incorporated more into therapy and working with folks and maintaining some kind of gratitude, deliberate process of identifying the blessings in your life through a gratitude journal, using our blessing boxes in CWF, that we deliberately stop and identify something that we're thankful for.
And they say thank you for those chocolate turtles.
Exactly. Exactly.
Taking them to
So-
my grandchildren.
It's okay.
Yeah. No, and I like the other night in the Advent book study, Paula Spencer was talking about the paper chains that were given out in the Advent kits. And so she got her students to do it. She made up kits, paper chain kits for her students and got them to all of them.
Good Lord.
Wow.
And she was talking the other night about what a positive experience it was, because those chains, what you're supposed to do is write something on each piece of paper that you were thankful for. And so what a positive experience it was for her kids, for a number of her students to do that. So,
And
So
then
I
remember,
kids were going to, on Christmas morning, they were going to be reading all of those in their homes to their families.
yeah.
I remember several years ago as an exercise about thankfulness, Diane Clark in the Night CWF group handed out a calendar, and I guess maybe it had, I don't know if it went for, if it was Advent, but every day you were supposed to put a penny for each
In your
item.
blessing box. It was-
Right.
Yep.
But one day you were to be grateful for all the windows you had.
Mhm.
One day you were grateful for doors, and not just doors to the outside, but cabinet doors and closet doors, because each one was a blessing because it opened up to something. And I remember one day was books, and it took me quite a while because I had over 2,000 books to count.
Yeah, penny per book or something. Yeah.
Yeah, penny per book. So yeah, the
Yeah.
blessing box got a lot of money that day from me.
Yeah.
But it was at least 30 days of different little things that we take for granted to be thankful for. And on the day that it talked about, and then maybe there was a day for closets or something, but this takes me back to a Minute for Mission I did probably 25 years ago. And at that time it said, if you have one closet and a refrigerator in your home, you are wealthier than 3/4 of the human population on the earth.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 refrigerators and, 8 closets at least. So to
You're
put life in
wealthy.
perspective.
You're wealthy.
Yeah, the penny shortage.
You even have a closet in the attic.
Yeah, and if you count the cubby holes, we got
Anymore.
more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
some
there,
of you.
there are many, even in, at least for me, even in the most despairing of moments or times, there's a tremendous amount to be grateful for. There's still far more things to be grateful for.
I have so much more now than I had when I was a kid, that when I planned my life out like A-type people do, I have way more than I was brave enough to plan for. I mean, I got what I prayed for like in my early 30s. I just never dreamed I would have what I have now, and the travel and the places I've been and seen.
Yeah.
Right.
God's been very good.
I'm thinking about people like Thomas Merton, monks and people who relinquish all of that stuff and end up with one room and one closet, so to speak. And sometimes we get all this stuff. It's kind of a funny cycle. You want, and then finally you're able to get, and then you have to maintain, and then you get to a point of saying, we got to get rid of some of this junk. And then you go back to that one room and that one closet.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really loved when we have we're very blessed to have a little sports car, a little Miata. But when we travel someplace in a Miata, it's so nice because you can only take so much with you. And it's like getting rid of all of that stuff you're leaving behind you in your house, and that you have to maintain and worry about, and what am I going to do with this? And sometimes all of that stuff. I remember George Carlin had a comedy routine where he talked about, "Don't touch my stuff," kind of thing. And so sometimes that stuff weighs you down.
Yes.
It does. Yes.
The saying is, he who owns little is little owned.
Mm,
Yeah.
I like that.
That
I'm mute.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Um, I have one child, a son, and he and his wife are the least materialistic people I have ever known. And things mean nothing to them. It's amazing to me because, like you all probably were back in our early lives, all I could think of was having the big house, everything in the big house and so forth. And they absolutely, it doesn't even enter their realm of thinking or considering, I want this. They don't. And it's amazing to me. I think how much smarter they are. They're not going to have to get to a certain point and, give it all away, as you said.
Barbara Bancroft's father was a classic example. She took us over there to meet him, and we were thinking about traveling to New Zealand, I think, and he had traveled all around the world. Interesting guy. But anyway, they said when Christmas time, if you get him a new shirt, he'll thank you for that, and he'll take it and put it on a hanger and walk into the closet, and he'll take another shirt out and take it out and put it in the glove box. And when we went to his house, we thought he had just moved in, and he had a chair and a lamp, and it was just minimal. And he had enough space to sit down. I don't know, but that's the way he was.
Wow.
Wow.
So we started this conversation by plucking out your eye or cutting off your arm.
Yeah, right. How did
right.
we get here? Help, Sarah.
Well, now we get to talk about marriage and Jews, Romans, and Greeks and how different they were. What an eye opener.
Yeah, really. Okay, so would somebody read Matthew 5, verses 31 and 32?
I'll do it.
Okay.
It has been said, let every man who divorces his wife give her a bill of divorcement. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife for any other reason, than any other cause than fornication, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a woman who has been so divorced himself commits adultery.
Okay. When Jesus laid down this law, he laid it down against a very definite situation. And I thought this was a really interesting sentence considering, and again, Kathy, anyway, there is no time in history when the marriage bond stood in greater peril of destruction than in the days when Christianity first came into this world. And like Kathy said, he wrote this in the 50s. So maybe we could compare today's marriage situation to that one. But for him to say that in Jesus's time, marriage was in more trouble than it's ever been since, really surprised me. The world was in danger of witnessing the almost total breakup of marriage and the collapse of the home. And then he talks about the double background. Not only did Christianity have a background in the Jewish world, but also in the secular world of the Romans and the Greeks, and that was actually two different backgrounds. The Jews held marriage as something very sacred. He says that the only people who were allowed to not get married were those who were studying the law. If you were not studying the law, the expectation was you were to get married and you were to have children. Because there's a commandment in the Old Testament that says, go forth, be fruitful and multiply. And that requires marriage because, you're not supposed to be having illegitimate kids. So they were expected to do that. And ideally, they hated divorce. You weren't supposed to do it. Somewhere he says, we find that God is long suffering to every sin except the sin of unchastity. Unchastity causes the glory of God to depart. Every Jew must surrender his life rather than commit idolatry, murder, or adultery. And so the one thing detracted from the whole marriage relationship, and that was the status of women, because basically they were property.
Mm-hmm.
In the eyes of the law, the woman was a thing. And so the rabbinic law says a woman can be divorced with or without her will, but a man could only be divorced with his will. And it was complicated because divorce was so very, very simple. The husband had to give his wife a bill of divorcement that said, let this be from me thy writ of divorce and letter of dismissal and deed of liberation, and thou mayest marry whosoever man thou wilt. And all he had to do was give her that piece of paper with 2 witnesses present, and they were divorced. The ultimate no fault divorce. Here, have a piece of paper, you're free.
And he probably got to keep all the stuff and she got sent back to her family.
Well,
Yeah.
assuming her family would take her.
That's right. That's right.
What of the children?
Well, I think that was the whole prohibition. That's a really good point. I think the whole point with divorce is the kids. I mean, look at the people we know that are divorced, and the man's income immediately goes up and the woman's immediately goes down because she gets the kids, and you never get enough money. The people I knew that were divorced never got enough money to support 3 people, as opposed to when the man's salary was in the home. You women with all the kids immediately take a huge pay cut.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the point. Divorce was not desirable because it broke up the family.
Yeah, and I don't know why I've thought this, but for a long time I've thought that this was, protection for the woman. Because a woman in that culture, a woman without a man to take care of her was pretty much forced into prostitution or something like that just to have enough money to eat.
And I think in a lot of cases, the woman's family did not take her back because they assumed she had sinned in some way, which is why the man cast her aside. She was damaged goods.
Yeah. So, lost my place here.
Well, even in the Jewish culture, if you look in the middle of 175, it talks about there were 2 Jewish schools of thought. One was very strict and one was very liberal. So.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking for.
The Hillel and Shammai.
Yeah, something objectionable. Somewhere in this law, it says that you can.
Yeah, the last paragraph on 175.
Well, I'm higher than that. Suppose a man enters into a marriage with a woman, but she does not please him because he finds something objectionable about her. So he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, sends her out of his house. What I'm after here is, how do you define something objectionable?
Something objectionable could be she's barren and can't have kids, or she burned my dinner last night.
Right. So the really strict ones, the Shammai, they were very strict, and the only thing that was considered objectionable was adultery.
In their books, in the Shammai.
In their books. And then you have the school of Hillel, where it could be, she put too much salt in the soup.
Yeah. Or she's not pretty enough. She's not attractive.
Yeah. Or they even said, oh, I just saw, she was fine yesterday, but today I met somebody that looks better.
Right.
So I want this woman, so, you're out of here. So we know how humans are. So obviously the school of Hillel got to be more popular. So when Jesus said this, he was not speaking as some theoretical idealist. He was speaking as a practical reformer. He was seeking to deal with a situation in which the structure of the family life was collapsing and in which national morals were becoming ever more lax. So, we could take this and say it about American life since what, the 1970s? It fits.
Well, if you read anything about the origin of Israel in 1947, one of the big fights they had was, other than incorporating the Palestinians, was Orthodox Jews, Reform Jews, and conservative Jews. They originally only wanted to import Orthodox Jews. And there were people in the, whatever the ruling body's called, that says, no, we take all Jews coming from every country. This is their homeland. So we're going to get them from all over the world, different races, different beliefs. But they really fought over, they did not want Reformed and conservative Jews. They only wanted Orthodox Jews that would follow the detail of the law. And they ended up taking all Jews, of course. But I think there's still some concerns over there in the governing body about the variation. And in New York City has more Jews than Israel does. And there's a huge variance in Jewish beliefs in New York City.
There's a huge variance in Christian beliefs.
Well, true.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you just look at Baptists, you got a range just within the Baptist denomination. I remember growing up, and the church that I grew up in had a very liberal thinking minister. And my mother talked about overhearing a conversation where somebody asked the minister, was it a sin to play cards on Sunday? Because they had that concern. And he said, well, is it a sin to play cards on Saturday? And the person said, no, of course not. He said, then it's not a sin on Sunday. But then there were other Baptists. I got to go to school dances. There were Baptists that thought it was a sin to wear makeup. It was a sin to dance. It was a sin to go to play cards on Sunday or go to the movies. You could do some things Monday through Saturday, but they did turn into sins on Sunday. So just within Baptist,
Oh yeah.
You got the whole range. So
yeah, I would venture to, we could make a good argument for a wide range of beliefs at Bon Air Christian Church.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Most definitely. When the two adult Sunday school classes were across the hall from each other, Cindy used to say it was like the parting of the Red Sea.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because we were so different.
Yeah.
And that's why when somebody when somebody new comes into the church, Cindy interviews them before she recommends a Sunday school class to make sure they don't end up in the wrong place.
Yeah, because that's happened.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
And talking about these differing, if to me, if somebody wants to choose to honor God by believing that it's a sin to play cards on Sunday, or in that level, to me that's their choice, and I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is them telling me that I have to do that.
Yep.
Right.
Too.
Yep.
I don't think Cindy's ever been in our Sunday school class, so there must be a bunch of tattletales or something,
Well, I will tell you, I don't know about you guys, but I have met with Cindy multiple times about how to deal with questions and issues that came up in our Sunday school class, because I don't know, but I think the Sojourners are the liberal branch, and I think the fellowship is the conservative branch of the church. And people say things in our Sunday school class, and I'm like, really? And I go talk to Cindy about it. So,
well, I would say that anybody calls my Sunday school class liberal, those are fighting words.
How about theologically liberal?
Who calls our Sunday school class conservative is fighting words.
We're neither one.
Okay,
dear.
You're not defined by that, so we're moving on.
Back to Leslie.
I'm still,
So the next section.
I'm still the missionary in our class.
Missionary. Aw.
And we love you for it, Harold. We do.
But you know, Harold, in truth, wouldn't you have to agree that on some issues, each of us can be conservative or liberal depending on the issue?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
Because like in this discussion by Barclay about Hillel and Shammai, to me, the Hillel group is not the liberal by today's definition of that word. They're liberal in terms of how broadly they defined something. But as far as being politically liberal, I don't think they were. So,
Right, probably not, yeah.
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 So, all right. So moving on to the bond that
Okay.
cannot be broken.
Okay, so the next section, he talks about marriage in the Greek culture. And this was a real eye-opener for me. They had a very low view of women. I'm not sure I like the way he put that. The Greeks married women and then locked them away. The women were not supposed to eat meals with men. They weren't supposed to appear in public by themselves. They were Greek men married women so that their homes could be taken care of and they had a legitimate heir, basically. They didn't speak to their wives, and I wondered if this was partially arranged marriages, and he doesn't say that, but to keep the family line pure, so to speak, you marry and your property is given to your heirs, but you live your life and have your enjoyment outside the home. So they had prostitutes at the temple. They had temple prostitutes, and that was just an accepted part of life. They actually raised money for some civic project with the temple prostitutes. So it was acceptable. To put it bluntly, the Greeks married a wife for domestic security, but found their pleasure elsewhere. Even Socrates said, "Is there anyone to whom you entrust more serious matters than to your wife? And is there anyone to whom you talk less?"
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, reading this, it doesn't sound that different than how marriage is often portrayed in the upper classes of Victorian England.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, marriage, this whole idea of romantic marriage and in love and all that, that's a new concept, in humanity. Mostly marriages all through history were of, if you want to say, of convenience. It took two to survive, or it took a clan to survive. And this whole idea of finding, your wife not up to par. They weren't married. Some people fell in love and married, of course, but mostly it was all, a mating of either families or convenience in the sense of survival. So I think this whole idea of romantic love sort of, I guess, got its beginnings in the writings of the Middle Ages, but certainly hit its high point in the Victorian era. And we think it's been that way forever, but it's just not,
Yeah.
Yeah. And I even read somewhere once, and y'all tell me if I'm totally off base because my memory doesn't work right, that in some European, in a lot of, anyway, that, go back to as current as maybe even the 17 or 1800s, only the well-to-do bothered with marriage because that's how property was transferred to younger generations. And if you didn't have any property, you really didn't need to bother to be married because, there was no legal need for it.
I haven't heard that, but I wouldn't doubt it if I read it somewhere.
Yeah, so if you were really poor, and there was some, apparently there was some class attitude that kept you with, you didn't just go flitting and making babies all over the place, but, you might basically be a common law marriage. You didn't need to do anything with a priest. It just, you shacked up and started making babies and you stayed put. And when you died, all you left behind were debts anyway.
Well, in the middle of page 178, it says there was an amazing alliance of religion and prostitution. And that just sounds abhorrent.
Yeah.
That they justified that.
Yeah, that's the section where,
and they had layers of prostitution in
yeah,
the next paragraph where it talks about common versus high class mistresses, sort of like Pretty Woman, the movie.
yeah. Yeah, so where you were talking earlier, talks about the Reformo Salon, who was the first to allow the introduction of prostitutes into Athens and the building of brothels. And with the profits of the brothels, a new temple was built to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The Greeks saw nothing wrong with the building of a temple with the proceeds of prostitution.
Well, but again, their gods that they were worshiping, the behavior of the gods was not anything you would want, you would want to use as a role model. So that's why this part to me didn't seem that strange, because if the gods behave badly, why shouldn't everyone else?
Good point.
Well, and before we go thinking Christianity's all that in a bag of chips, if I'm not mistaken, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome was built with indulgence money, which Martin Luther said had to stop. You're robbing people. I mean, little old ladies are given their last mite, and all that money went to build St. Peter's Basilica from indulgence money. So, I mean, Christians don't get it right either.
Yeah. So like Kitten said, the well-to-do people had mistresses and since the wives were shut away, the mistresses were responsible for taking care of the men for the most part, which was weird.
Well, and it says in that sentence about 10 from the bottom of 178, the mistresses of famous men were easily the most cultured and socially accomplished women of their day, which leads me to believe they spoke languages, they played musical instruments, they
were educated.
They read books, they read poetry, and it's
because they were allowed to. They were the ones that were allowed to do that. The wife, from what this is saying, the wives weren't allowed to.
Well, they didn't leave the home unless they were escorted by a man because they could get into trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that really hurt the situation in Greece was that divorce required no legal process whatsoever. A man, all he had to do was to dismiss his wife in the presence of two witnesses. He didn't even have to give her a piece of paper. He just needed to.
He had to return her dowry, though.
Yes, he did have to return her dowry.
So that way she could go live with her family until she found another suitable man.
Yeah. So, so that was Greece. Now, Rome started out just the opposite. Marriage was considered a partnership. But let me back up even before that. In terms of family, the father was the ruler of the family. And as long as your father was alive, it didn't matter how much authority or power you had out in public, government or whatever your job was, as long as your father was alive, he told you what was what. And it made me think of poor Prince Charles, who, is one day may be the King of England and he's in his 70s waiting for mama to retire. Same type of thing. So a Roman son never came of age until his father was gone. To Rome, the home was everything. The matron was not secluded like her Greek counterpart. She took her full part in life. Marriage is a lifelong fellowship of all divine human rights. They did have prostitutes, but they were held in contempt. In fact, they give a story about a Roman magistrate who was robbed or, had something happen to him in a house of ill repute, and he did not want to go to the authorities because he had to admit that where he was and didn't want. So Rome had a totally different attitude about it. And it said that so high was the standard of Roman morality that for the first 500 years of the Roman Commonwealth, there was not one recorded case of divorce.
And the first case was because she couldn't have children.
Right.
Which is reasonable.
Right. So, and then came the Greeks, and it all went to hell.
Yeah, really fast too.
Yeah.
Well, the Romans were going to have an issue though, because sons started killing dads so they could rule. I mean, it's all, think of the Roman emperors where they were bumped off by their own family.
Yeah. So, so it got so bad after the Greeks culturally took over Rome. And this is the part where he said, in military terms, Rome took over Greece, but in cultural terms, Greece took over Rome. It got so bad that he talks about women who identified the years not by the name of who was counsel, but who was their husband. One man wrote about a woman who had 8 husbands in 5 years.
Good.
And another man wrote about a woman who had 10 husbands.
But imagine if they had sons. Each wife is going to want her son to be the heir. So imagine the conflict.
Yeah, it got ugly.
Yeah. Well, you have that now with sons and stepsons and who gets the house and who gets mama's ring. And I mean, it, you know, it can be
Yeah.
ugly now in combined families.
You know,
Yeah, well,
I'm sorry. This talking about the Rome and the Hebrews. I mean, if you think about then Israel, you had Herod ruling Jewish Galilee, but you had the Romans ruling Judea. So right there, and then you had Samaria right in between. So I mean, you lots of stuff stirring right there within just Israel politically.
Yeah. So the whole thing was a mess, but it got so bad, marriage got so bad, the divorce problem, that he says that there were as many divorces as there were marriages, and young girls just didn't want to be married. They just assumed their husbands were going to dump them at some point, and the girls were refusing to get married. And it got so bad, it says, to such a pass did things come that special taxes were levied on the unmarried. So if you didn't get married, they taxed you for it. And the unmarried were prohibited from entering into inheritance. So if you wanted to inherit what dad had, you had to be married. Special privileges were given to those who had children, for children were regarded as a disaster. The very law was manipulated in an attempt to rescue the necessary institution of marriage. So that's how things stood when Christianity was coming to be, and Christianity was, making marriage, putting it back to where it had been in terms of, you marry for life, adultery is wrong. So it was a shock. And that ends this section. It ends our time. And so I think Kathy teaches next week. Okay,
Yep.
You're going to start with a word is a pledge. Have fun with that.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas.